Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. California will soon become the first state to mandate vaccines for eligible students in K through 12. The mandate will take effect after full FDA approval. The New York State healthcare workers can now file religious exemptions against the vaccine mandate, but only temporarily. Drug maker Merck says its experimental drug for COVID-19 cuts the risk of death or hospitalization by 50%. It's applying for emergency use with the FDA. A school board group says teachers are facing domestic terrorism, and they're asking the federal government to step in. It comes amid heated disagreements over virus rules and disputed curricula. As the Marine officer who demanded accountability from military leadership sits in prison, his parents are speaking out. NTD spoke with them to learn more about their son's motivations. President Biden today met with Democrat lawmakers on Capitol Hill to forge a path forward on his Build Back Better agenda, a plan with uncertain future as progressives and moderate Democrats have different priorities. After the hour-long meeting, Biden expressed confidence in success.
It doesn't matter when. It doesn't matter whether it's in 6 minutes, 6 days, or 6 weeks. We're going to get it done.
His Build Back Better plan includes two parts, $1 trillion for hard infrastructure and $3.5 trillion for social welfare and climate projects. But both of these are stalled in Congress because of disagreements among Democrats. Progressives say they'll pass the smaller, hard infrastructure plan only if the social spending package passes first. But a few moderates in the Senate say that would cost too much. Senator Manchin says there's a better way that costs less, and he won't encourage the entitlement mentality. Manchin wants a smaller spending bill, but so far progressives aren't backing down. And to appease progressives, House Speaker Pelosi has been postponing the vote on the smaller infrastructure bill all week, and moderate Democrats' patience is wearing thin. California will soon become the first state to mandate vaccines for eligible students. The governor said this will apply to K through 12 students. NTD's Eileen Egg has more details.
Governor Gavin Newsom announced that all eligible students in California will be required to get the COVID-19 vaccine to go to school. Students ages 12 and older will be required to get a vaccine to have in-person instruction. It will be part of the list of mandatory vaccinations to attend school.
There is no substitute for in-person instruction. But we need to do that on a consistent and sustainable basis, not an episodic basis.
The mandate will go in effect after full FDA approval and can take effect as soon as January or July next year.
Which will give us time to work with districts, give us time to work with parents and educators to build more trust and confidence and build out a logistics so that we can deliver on what we are promoting here today.
After the FDA grants approval for younger children, students from kindergarten to 6th grade will also be required to get vaccinated to go to school. Medical and religious exemptions will be granted. The governor predicts other states will follow suit. Parents react to the announcement.
Everyone I know has been vaccinated. We haven't seen any ill effects from that, at least that I know of. I trust that the vaccinations are safe for kids, so I think it's a good idea.
I just think it's a parent's decision, period. The government in no shape or form should be having mandates like that. I don't care for that. I'm a veteran, I served this country, and I fought for those rights.
I'm delighted to see that we're trying to get this health crisis under control, and we have lots of other vaccine requirements. I don't see why this one would be any different.
California was the first state in the U.S. to mandate masks in school and staff to be vaccinated or tested weekly. Eileen Ang, NTD News, California.
One Southern California school district is being sued for its strict vaccine and mask mandates for children. And while some California counties are expanding their policies, another is easing its rules for the vaccinated. NTD's Cynthia Kai has the details.
On September 30th, the San Diego Superior Court held an initial hearing for an emergency temporary restraining order against the state for its masking, testing, and close contact quarantine guidance. The two organizations, Let Them Breathe and Reopen California Schools, filed a joint lawsuit against California's Department of Public Health and Governor Gavin Newsom back in July.
They did acknowledge that the testing and the close contact quarantine guidance are only recommendations, which we wanted that to be addressed and clarified, and that means that that is up to schools. They do still have local control in implementation. Those are not requirements.
The full preliminary injunction court hearing is set for November 8th. According to the July 28th health guidance, individuals are required to wear masks indoors regardless of vaccination status. This includes all indoor settings such as public transit and K-12 schools.
So people ask me, am I not concerned about safety? Absolutely I am, and I know that this has been a really difficult time. But my son almost didn't survive last year, and it wasn't due to COVID. It was due to the mental health impact of the school closures and the restrictions like masking.
McKeeman says the organization also launched the Let Them Choose initiative, which is filing another lawsuit next week against San Diego Unified School District. The new initiative is in response to the possibility of a statewide vaccine mandate. The city of Los Angeles is considering a vaccine mandate for all non-essential indoor facilities. The city council will review the initiative for a second reading and vote next week. However, in Northern California, Santa Cruz County lifted its indoor mask mandate on Wednesday for vaccinated people. Masks will still be required indoors for unvaccinated residents and in schools, medical facilities, and senior care facilities. Local health officials cited the recent decline in viral transmission rates across the county. Cynthia Kai, NTD News, California.
New York State healthcare workers can now file religious exemptions against the vaccine mandate. That's after a group of people went to court on Wednesday. NTD's Arian Pazdar spoke with the plaintiff's lawyer.
An organization called We the Patriots USA appealed at a federal court in New York. They won this hearing, meaning the state is allowing religious exemptions for now. They will go back to court against the state in 2 weeks. Both sides will bring their arguments for why or why not religious exemptions should be accepted.
Do you think New York State will allow religious exemptions permanently?
I am very confident that we will win this case either at the Second Circuit or the United States Supreme Court. The First Amendment's clear.
Among other things, the First Amendment says people should be allowed to freely exercise their religion. In the Free Exercise Clause, it says its purpose is to secure religious liberty in the individual by prohibiting any invasion there by civil authority. Some religious believers are against the vaccine because they were partly made from aborted fetal cell lines. But the Free Exercise Clause also says it's only valid so long as the practice does not run afoul of a public morals or a compelling governmental interest. Because of that, back in 1944, the Supreme Court ruled that a state could force the inoculation of children whose parents were against it for religious reasons. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
And the Supreme Court today refused to block New York City's vaccine mandate for teachers. The mandate requires all public school teachers to get vaccinated by 5 p.m. today or face suspension with no pay. A group of teachers had asked the High Court to impose a temporary injunction. This is the second time the Supreme Court declined to block a COVID-19 vaccine mandate. And a judge from the highest court on American soil has tested positive for COVID-19. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh tested positive on Thursday. This is according to the court's spokeswoman. The 56-year-old Trump-appointed judge tested positive during a routine test. His wife and children tested negative. They're all fully vaccinated against COVID. Good news is that the justice is asymptomatic, but he won't attend Justice Amy Barrett's investiture, which is set to take place today. During that ceremony, the chief judge will administer the constitutional oath to Justice Barrett. And Merck is requesting emergency use authorization for an experimental COVID-19 drug. It targets the CCP virus's ability to make copies of itself. NTD's Faye Corder has more.
Merck has a new COVID-19 drug called molnupiravir. Experiments showed that molnupiravir reduced the risk of death or hospitalization for patients with mild to moderate COVID-19 by 50%. In a news release this morning, Merck says it will submit an application for emergency use authorization to the U.S. FDA as soon as possible.
The news of the efficacy of this particular antiviral is obviously very good news. The data are impressive.
Dr. Fauci says the FDA will look at the data as quickly as possible, and upon approval, the CDC will have to go through the same process.
The federal government has contracted to purchase 1.7 million doses to make this therapy available. The government also has an option for some additional doses. If approved, I think the right way to think about this is a potential additional tool in our toolbox.
Molnupiravir is an oral drug that targets the virus's ability to make copies of itself by putting errors into its genetic code. This shortens the period of sickness.
Even if it gets an approval from the FDA for emergency use, the bigger challenge is how do you get it to people and what kind of people will be able to afford it?
This professor of public health at New Mexico State University says even though Merck hasn't said how much it'll charge, he assumes it'll be a very high amount compared to other antiviral drugs.
Compared to the traditional antiviral drugs that we have in the market that have been in place for a long time, this would be almost double the price or triple the price.
Merck says it's in talks with other governments as well. Meanwhile, Pfizer, Roche, and Atea Pharmaceuticals are working on their own oral antiviral drugs. Faye Quarter, NTD News.
A school board group is claiming that educators are being threatened by parents. They're calling on the federal government to investigate. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
The National School Boards Association, or NSBA, has written to President Biden for help. It's over what they call an increasing amount of violence, threats, and intimidation against schools and education leaders nationwide. Broadly speaking, mask and vaccine mandates, as well as controversial curriculum like critical race theory, have caused parents to speak out, sometimes passionately, at school board meetings. Now the school board group is sounding the alarm about violence towards educators, calling it a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes, and asking the FBI and DOJ to investigate. Addressing the issue is a former public relations official with the Justice Department and current director of the nonpartisan PAC Fight for Schools, Ian Pryor.
I think it's absolutely appalling that the National School Board Association is asking the Biden administration to investigate parents as domestic terrorists. I mean, look, children are the most important things in their parents' lives. And for the past 2 years, what we've seen are children being kept home from school where they don't have to be. We've seen curriculum being shoved down their children's throats without, any parental involvement whatsoever.
The NSBA cited several incidents that happened in the last few months at school board meetings to support their claim. Those include disorderly conduct in Loudoun County, Virginia over critical race theory and LGBTQ issues, a Nazi salute in Michigan over mask requirements, and a disturbance in central western Illinois, among others. The group said now is a critical time to take a proactive approach to deal with the issue, yet Pryor draws a distinction between substantial violence and peacefully practicing First Amendment rights.
It's kind of ironic that we had all these riots and cities burning down last year, and all we heard were, well, these were mostly peaceful. And you look around at what's going on at school boards, and it is all peaceful. You're talking about parents that are going there and exercising their First Amendment rights to be part of a system that they pay for the purposes of educating their children. And you've got this National School Board Association that wants to label them as domestic terrorists. That is scary stuff.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki recognized the incidents as threats and said they are horrible. And she said they will look for solutions at the federal level, but it would mostly fall in the hands of local law enforcement. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Multiple women shared their abortion stories with members of Congress on Thursday. The perspectives varied, but a doctor's testimony caught the public's attention. She called what many regard as murder a blessing. NTD's Miguel Moreno has that story.
Good morning, Chairwoman.
In her opening statement, gynecologist Gazale Moyeri said the Texas heartbeat law denies women access to what she called a blessing.
I know firsthand that abortion saves lives. For the thousands of people I've cared for, abortion is a blessing. Abortion is an act of love. Abortion is freedom.
Several women, including members of Congress, testified in the abortion rights hearing. Congresswoman Cori Bush said she was raped at 17 and aborted her unborn child.
I went home, my body ached, and I had this heavy bleeding. I felt so sick, I felt dizzy, nauseous. I felt like something was missing. I felt alone, but I also felt so resolved in my decision. Choosing to have an abortion was the hardest decision I had ever made. But at 18 years old, I knew it was the right decision for me. It was freeing, knowing I had options. Even still, it took long for me to feel like me again until most recently.
Another congresswoman put it bluntly. She'd be dead if her mother had listened to her doctor's recommendation.
I am incredibly grateful. There are millions of women out there like my mom who made the same decision that she did. With her decision, we were able to go as the daughter of a single mother from homeless to the House of Representatives. That is only possible in America, and that is only possible in America that values life.
One speaker took issue with the terminology used in the hearing.
A lot of people are being left out of this conversation today because, as we know, people get pregnant and not just women. But I hear people over and over and over again say women get pregnant.
The CDC has taken this approach. In a tweet, the agency used the term pregnant people instead of pregnant women. Several Republicans present opposed the hearing, saying the Oversight Committee should instead focus on the pandemic, the border crisis, or Afghanistan. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
How much are you paying for our federal government to operate? On average, American taxpayers spend about $1 billion per day on the federal workforce. And the government is only getting bigger. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the story.
The number of executive employees is at a modern-day high. There are currently over 2 million federal employees, footing the bill American taxpayers at $140 million per hour. This latest report by government watchdog group OpenTheBooks.com maps out how the government has expanded over the years, especially during the pandemic.
And Congress appropriated about $5 trillion for COVID aid and COVID relief. This blew out the executive agency payroll, because when you spend more, you do need more employees to get the money out the door. During the pandemic, Dr. Anthony Fauci made about $17,000 more than what he made in 2019. Fauci out-earns all of them. He out-earns the President of the United States. Last year, he made $434,000. He out-earns four-star generals in the United States military.
And not only is the government taking more from paychecks, but its regulations are also seeping more into personal lives. For example, Congress right now is working to pass that $3.5 trillion budget bill, and in it, there's a rule that would increase fines that companies would pay if they violate Biden's vaccine and testing mandates.
For each instance of non-compliance with OSHA regulation, they would make that $70,000. Rather than $70,000 on the willful and repeated violations, they would make that $700,000. The Biden administration is playing hardball. We expose their strategy, and their strategy is very aggressive. They want to bankrupt companies that don't comply with the vaccine mandate.
Also in the budget bill, Congress is working on a proposed rule for the IRS to monitor Americans' bank accounts, both business and personal accounts. Banks would have to give a detailed report to the IRS every year, noting when people make a transaction more than $600. Lawmakers are planning to increase that amount to $10,000, but they still aim to keep the IRS bank account monitoring in place. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
The Drug Enforcement Administration announced more than 800 arrests and a seizure of more than 1.8 million fake pills. It's part of a 2-month operation and crackdown on the illicit fentanyl.
Counterfeit pills that have been brought into the United States have been illegally produced in Mexico using precursor chemicals supplied by Chinese companies. Now, we will be working closely with Mexico to seek assistance to close these labs, and we call on China to work with us to help stop the misuse of precursor chemicals for criminal purposes.
It's critical to understand that the fentanyl and the fentanyl-laced counterfeit pills that we seized in this surge are being mass-produced in Mexico by the Sinaloa and the CJNG drug cartels. These are the criminal organizations that we believe are responsible for producing the drugs that are flooding our streets.
Authorities arrested the 810 drug traffickers in cities, suburbs, and rural communities across the United States. Fentanyl is blamed for an escalating overdose death rate in the United States. In the past, fentanyl was mainly mixed with heroin. Now it's often pressed into small blue tablets to closely match the color and markings of prescription oxycodone pills. The U.S. Deputy Attorney General said in a statement, opioids were responsible for nearly 3/4 of the more than 93,000 fatal drug overdoses in the United States in 2020. Drug Enforcement Agency testing shows 4 out of 10 fentanyl-laced pills contain a potentially deadly dose. A report by the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission shows China remains the primary source of illegal fentanyl being trafficked into the United States, despite the Chinese regime banning it in 2019. And the Biden administration can continue to deny illegal immigrants entry to the country during a health crisis under a measure known as Title 42. A federal appeals court just approved the measure yesterday. NTD's Jason Perry spoke with a border expert who's also a former congressman to find out his thoughts on security concerns at the border.
Before the court decision, Department of Homeland Security officials said if Title 42 goes away, they could potentially face between 350 to 400,000 encounters at the Mexican border in October. John Hostetler, Vice President of Federal Affairs at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, visited the Texas border city Del Rio this past summer, and he saw some security concerns when he boarded his flight home.
There was a young family from Africa that was behind me, and they were going to get on the same plane, and they had been processed at the border and received papers through the local non-governmental organization, the local NGO that helps facilitate the processing and movement into the country with the Department of Homeland Security. And they had received documentation from them, but when the ticket agent asked to see some photo identification for the 3 family members, mom, dad, and precious little boy, they could not come up with any photo identification.
But they were still allowed to board the plane.
There might be individuals that are portraying themselves as families, and you have maybe a mother and child and a man that accompanies them. There's no photo identification. There's nothing document-wise tying them together, so they may represent themselves as a family, but it might be that man might be trying to find a way to get into the country, and because we don't have marriage certificates or driver's license or passports or visas or anything, we're just taking everyone's word at the border.
He says the crisis that we have at the border today is going to translate into a crisis throughout the country, and he's concerned that maybe we have not learned our lesson from 9/11. Jason Perry, NTD News.
A Marine Corps officer waits for his trial in military confinement, while his parents speak out against perceived injustices in senior military leadership. They've taken up their son's mission to ask for accountability. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller is in confinement for asking military leadership to own up to their mistakes. Cindy Drucare from NTD's The Nation Speaks hosted his parents in an interview on Friday.
And on Monday, when he was put into prison, again, he had about a 90-second phone call to us and said, number 1, call my attorney, and number 2, tell everyone. And so thanks to people like you, we've been on the circuit for the last 5 days trying to tell America, find your voice, stand up, demand accountability from your congresspeople. Contact the Commandant of the Marine Corps if you'd like. Contact the Secretary of the Navy if you'd like.
Over 30 congressmen signed a letter requesting an expedited review and removal of Scheller from pretrial confinement. He said if the leadership accepted accountability, it would do more for service members with PTSD or suffering with purpose than any transparent piece of paper or message.
I, as a mother, am wanting to support these, not only my son, but these military service people who need to be supported and uplifted for all that they have given and all that their families have given. And I am not going to be quiet until that happens.
I said the other day, the Marine Corps would more than likely win the battle against Stuart Scheller. It's one lone lieutenant colonel against the entire leadership and Pentagon of the Marine Corps. They can, no doubt they will win the battle, but America is going to help Stuart win the war.
Scheller's trial is scheduled for Tuesday. His parents said they hope it will be public because they want to see their son again. Jason Perry, NTD News.
And you can catch the full interview on The Nation Speaks with Cindy Drucker this Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And the Dollar Tree may no longer live up to its name. The store has sold $1 products for over 30 years, but they recently announced that they're testing new price points. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Headquartered in Virginia, this discount retailer operates over 15,000 stores across 48 states. So that means a dollar bill could take you a long way here. In a September 28 press release, Dollar Tree announced plans to add pricing above $1 across all Dollar Tree Plus stores. This is based on positive reactions to its new stores offering different price points.
The range of the items is going to increase because, let's face it, $1 a piece, they cannot keep all the items here, right? And the quality of the items also, sometimes I don't take those items because I don't know how much, how the quality will be for $1, let's say for some food or something, right? So yeah, it's good. It's good. They are expanding their business, so it should be good. Yeah.
I think Dollar Tree is it's a good place to to get things really cheaply. But this day and age, unfortunately, sometimes you get what you pay for, if you know what I mean. But I mean, it's great for like little trinkets or household cleaners, ice creams, breads.
They plan to have 500 of the new stores in the United States by fiscal year end that offer items from $1, $3, and $5. And they also want to begin testing prices over $1 in selected legacy stores.
Actually, we have a party tonight, so I bought a couple of gift wraps, gift bags to wrap all the gifts, couple of gift items, couple of household items. That's about it.
It depends on the product. I mean, the items that I get at the Dollar Tree, I probably wouldn't get for $3, probably, but if it's new products that, I don't know, that I think are a good value, I might.
I'm here for buying something for Halloween, or like simple birthday decorations or something that I use not so often, but just once in a while.
The CEO, Michael Watinsky, stated, "Our brand promise is that customers get great value for what they spend at Dollar Tree. We will continue to be fiercely protective of that promise, regardless of the price point, whether it is $1, $1.25, $1.50. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Up next, the Chinese Communist Party calls today National Day. While Hong Kong officials celebrate the founding of the communist regime, protesters march outside. They're calling for justice for jailed pro-democracy activists. But notably, there are fewer protesters than in previous years. And to mark the holiday, the communist regime sent a record number of military aircraft into Taiwan's air defense zone, a total of 38. More after the break here on NTD News.
I will bless those who bless you.
Here in Israel and the former Soviet Union, the Jewish people are living in very difficult times. There are now thousands of destitute, elderly Jews who are desperately in need of basic food. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews is on the ground with survival food boxes, but the need for food is growing. Call or go online now and say, "I will bless these children of Abraham."
It's the elderly widows who are hurting the most. Many of them are also Holocaust survivors who are once again crying out for help. Their need, as you can see, is extremely urgent.
Right now, you can give a gift of life of $25 that will help rush an emergency food box to an elderly Jewish person who doesn't have enough to eat. When you call right now, your gift's impact will be doubled to help save lives.
For over 35 years, this trusted ministry has given Christians like me a way to tangibly bless Jewish people who are in need throughout the world.
Wherever in the world the Jewish people have the greatest need, our spiritual mandate is to feed the hungry and to care for the widows and orphans.
Together, we bring them comfort and love, but just as important, we bring them this life-saving food box.
When you call right now, your gift's impact will be doubled to help save lives. Without your response, their pain and suffering will continue.
Call or go online now and say, I will save a life. I will bless and comfort the Jewish people.
October 1st is called National Day in China. While Hong Kong officials celebrate the founding of the communist regime, protesters outside calling for justice for jailed pro-democracy activists. But there were notably far fewer people than in years past.
October the 1st is the 72nd anniversary of China's National Day. Hong Kong officially held a flag-raising ceremony to mark the day. Its chief executive, Carrie Lam, hosted a reception. Meanwhile, 4 pro-democracy protesters took the street. They were marching towards Hong Kong's convention center, the venue for the official celebration. Dozens of police surrounded them while they marched and chanted "Free political prisoners" and "Power to the people." The protesters were holding a placard with images of many pro-democracy activists who were jailed in recent months under the national security law. Critics call the law the end of Hong Kong. It allows Beijing to step in to deal with activity that could challenge its authority. The police stopped the protesters when they were close to the ceremony venue to shut them down and prevent them from reaching Lam and Communist Party officials on site. According to public broadcaster RTHK, Hong Kong authorities deployed over 8,000 police officers across the city. China's National Day was widely considered a day to protest in Hong Kong, but the crowds have been shrinking drastically each year. In 2019, during the extensive unrest on National Day, authorities said 51 people were injured and nearly 100 arrested.
And Beijing marked the day by sending a record-breaking number of military planes into Taiwan's air defense zone. Meanwhile, in the U.S., Boston also tried to mark the occasion, but that didn't turn out so well. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more.
And how is the Chinese Communist Party showing its national pride on the National Day? With a mass air incursion of Taiwan's air defense zone. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry said that 38 Chinese aircraft had entered its air defense zone, including 2 nuclear-capable bombers. Taiwan sent combat aircraft to warn away the Chinese aircraft, while missile systems were deployed to monitor them. The number of planes in this incursion was 10 more than China's all-time record of 28 aircraft that happened in June this year. And also this year, China has been sending military planes into Taiwan more frequently compared to last year. China's latest incursion came less than a day after China delivered an intense denunciation of Taiwan's foreign minister. China claims self-ruled Taiwan as its own territory, despite the island having its own democratically elected president, its own currency, government, military, and constitution. Now we turn to a protest in Boston.
Take the flag down! Take it down!
The demonstrators are protesting against the city's decision to raise the Chinese flag. Here's a little bit of context. October 1st marks the day the Chinese Communist Party officially took control of China. And in China, the regime calls it the National Day. And each year around this time, Boston has hoisted the Chinese flag to honor the day. The event also drew people protesting against Beijing's human rights abuses.
Free the Uyghur Muslims now! Free the Uyghur Muslims now!
Uyghurs are an ethnic minority in China. They are mostly concentrated in China's Xinjiang region. The U.S. says Beijing is committing genocide against Uyghurs, including through mass detention and forced sterilizations. Back in Boston, one protester holds a sign that reads, "Time for Massachusetts to sever ties with the Chinese Communist Party." Another holds a sign that says, "I am a Chinese person, but I won't be Beijing's agent in America." As for the flag-raising ceremony, it didn't go too smoothly, the flag getting stuck halfway through because of a technical issue.
Coming up, a special report on Australia's pandemic measures. NTD is on the ground where demonstrators are striking against strict lockdowns and vaccine mandates. And El Salvador is using energy from volcanoes to power Bitcoin mining. The country is the first to make Bitcoin legal tender. That and more soon on NTD News. Many British gas stations are still dry today after a chaotic week for drivers. Panic buying and even fights at the pumps were seen as drivers jostled in lines. NTD's Patrick Hayden in London has the story.
The UK's gas station emergency continues. Many stations are still dry. The country's been unable to supply fuel for its drivers, and for many it's essential to carry out their jobs or travel to work. The head of the Petrol Retailers Association also has concerns for its members selling gas at stations under tense conditions.
And people overtaking, fights breaking out on the forecourt, knives being drawn, filling up in plastic bags, etc., isn't helpful.
Government officials are saying the supply problem is abating, but retailers are saying that more than 2,000 gas stations were dry.
It looks like the situation is getting better in other parts of the UK, so Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, some parts of England, but the situation is not great, unfortunately, around London and the South East.
A chronic shortage of truck drivers is central to the crisis. The government's furlough scheme ended Thursday, which means some drivers will be looking to get back to work.
Well, all I can tell you, we spoke to one major logistics supplier yesterday, and they said they'd had around 700 applications to come and be a lorry driver, which is good news. I know what they're actively trying to improve the terms and conditions. What they're trying to do is make the driving a lorry more attractive, and we hope that there'll be a pool of labour that would be attracted to come into the industry.
And in a bizarre turn of events, the UK government sent letters this week to Germans residing in the UK, asking them to consider becoming truck drivers. German driving licenses issued before 1999 include a provision to drive trucks. One German in the UK who received the letter told The Independent he's sure conditions have improved for truck drivers, but he's going to stick with his role at an investment bank. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
El Salvador is successfully mining Bitcoin from volcanic energy. It's not the first country to do so, but it is the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. And that's why this is critical for the crypto community. NTD's Phil Zhou has the details.
Volcano, lava, eruption, not things that come to mind when you think of Bitcoin mining. But that's exactly what's happening.
I'm really excited to see El Salvador start mining Bitcoin with volcanoes.
This might be, in the long run, a little bit of a double-edged sword for the Bitcoin community.
Sounds really cool, but it's not economically viable. It's basically for show and display.
El Salvador has mined 0.006 Bitcoin, or about $300, using geothermal energy from volcanoes.
Volcano energy, which is totally renewable and very cheap, is an excellent source of energy. And what Bitcoin mining does is essentially enables you to convert that energy into money.
But crypto journalist David Gerard says at 15 cents per kilowatt hour, Bitcoin mining in El Salvador makes no economic sense.
The average rate for Bitcoin mining is 5 cents a kilowatt hour. When the inputs cost 3 times as much, that's probably not a sustainable business.
So why the big fuss? Because Bitcoin is legal money in El Salvador.
Companies that might move there for Bitcoin mining don't face the concerns that they have everywhere else with jurisdictional legal issues with Bitcoin.
But there are still concerns.
How stable is the jurisdiction? How stable is that country's environment? How good are the economic institutions there?
On Thursday, thousands of citizens marched through the capital, protesting against the Bitcoin law, calling their president a terrorist and a dictator.
The president needs to show his plan as being a big win, even if it isn't, because of the demonstrations against him last week.
So some people are saying that they don't want government involvement at all, and therefore El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender is actually counterproductive to the overall goals of the Bitcoin community.
But many are supportive.
It's great for Bitcoin. It's great for El Salvador. It's great for humanity, because the more energy that we can use to secure the Bitcoin network, the more valuable and secure this network that we can all access is.
El Salvador is known as the land of volcanoes. About a fourth of the country's energy production already comes from geothermal sources such as volcanoes. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
The Premier of New South Wales, Australia's most populous state, has resigned. This after the state's anti-corruption watchdog announced an investigation into her relationship with a former member of parliament who's suspected of corruption. Here's Premier Gladys Berejiklian making the announcement.
Resigning at this time is against every instinct in my being and something which I do not want to do. I love my job and I love serving the community, but I have been given no option following the statement that's been issued today. To continue as Premier would disrupt the state government during a time when our entire attention should be focused on the challenges confronting New South Wales.
The Independent Commission Against Corruption says it's investigating whether the Premier was involved in conduct that constituted or involved a breach of public trust. This is relating to her secret 5-year relationship with Daryl Maguire, a former member of Parliament. Maguire is accused of using his public office to benefit himself and a company he effectively controlled. The watchdog will look into whether Berejiklian should have suspected Maguire of corruption and whether she allowed or encouraged it. Berejiklian maintains she has always acted with the highest level of integrity. Her resignation will take effect as soon as the state's Liberal Party can elect a new leader. And the Australian Prime Minister announced earlier today that the country will reopen its international border starting in November. Australia has had its border sealed since March 2020, at times even barring its own citizens from leaving the country. The Prime Minister says Australians will be allowed to travel once their state's vaccination rate hits 80%. And now, a special report on Australia's pandemic measures. We hear from demonstrators on strike against vaccine mandates, as well as a journalist who's been covering anti-lockdown protests and strict enforcement of stay-at-home orders. NTD's Grace Coulter has the story.
Some of the videos coming out of Australia, especially from Victoria, have shocked the world. The region has some of the strictest pandemic measures in the world and some of the most heavy-handed enforcement. Even Florida Governor Ron DeSantis commented this week on the severity of the situation.
I mean, is Australia freer than China, communist China right now? I don't know. The fact that that's even a question tells you something has gone dramatically off the rails.
Parts of Australia like Victoria and New South Wales are still locked down. And over the last several months, there have been numerous anti-lockdown protests. On Friday, strikes against vaccine mandates took place in at least 24 regions. Workers across multiple sectors affected by the mandate came together. NTD's Australia correspondent Alex Joseph was in Melbourne, Victoria, ahead of the strike.
Alex Joseph for NTD News. We are here in central Melbourne. We've been here all week, following the mass protests that took place Saturday and Monday. Now, Melbourne is experiencing its 6th lockdown, the longest lockdown in the world. Here on the ground, we have seen that there's not many people around, but there is heavy police presence. We are here at Parliament House, where there are literally coach loads of police officers to keep the peace at the threat of protests.
The demonstrators here are mainly nurses and teachers. They were peaceful, socially distanced, and most of them masked. But that didn't stop an arrest from taking place. This woman holding a banner was arrested for not providing her name and address to police. Due to the pandemic, Victoria Police have been given emergency powers that expand their ability to detain citizens. The woman was soon released. She told NTD that because she didn't resist arrest, the officers had no grounds to hold her. Victoria Police said in a statement that 2 others participating in the demonstrations were arrested for the same reason.
This is supposed to be a democratic country. I don't know what's happened to Australia. I certainly don't know what's happened to Melbourne.
This strike ended with the police dispersing the demonstrators.
I find the significant police presence very, very threatening. I find the footage that has been revealed from the tradies protests in the city and having that armoured vehicle of which the police jumped off and shot the running tradies in the back with their rubber bullets. I was absolutely shocked.
NTD's The Nation Speaks talked with Melbourne-based reporter Avi Yemeni from Rebel News. He's been on the ground covering protests and excessive police enforcement measures. He says many officers have told him privately that they don't agree with what's going on.
Just like the wider community, I think there's big division within the police force. There are certainly some, even a lot, unfortunately, of cops that it turns out they joined the police force for the wrong reasons and they're loving this power trip. But
some, he says, have told him they're quitting because they aren't okay with enforcing the government's strict lockdown measures. Victoria State Premier Daniel Andrews extended the vaccine mandate on Friday to numerous other industries. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
Coming up, the first imperial wedding in Russia in over a century. A relative of the last Tsar of Russia tied the knot in the former imperial capital, St. Petersburg. Guests included members of Europe's royal families. And a group of Dutch students will make their way from Paris to southern Spain soon on a solar-powered camper van they created themselves. Find out more in just a moment here on NTD News.
You worked hard for your money. You invest in stability for your retirement and your family's future, to build and leave them with something greater. The next unprecedented financial crisis, political misstep, or unstable government can depreciate it all away. It was called the gold standard for a reason, the financial preservation of tomorrow. Diversify your assets against inflation, market volatility, and the unknown with real money. Hedge your wealth with the purest form of money, physical gold and silver. Because any currency printed on paper can be manipulated. What's backing up your IRA? Do what you need to do right now to be prepared with the Reagan Gold Group. Visit now, rggusakit.com, or call us at 866-912-1384. Receive up to $2,500 in free silver coins and a free safe with your new precious metals IRA. Call now.
For the first time since the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, an imperial wedding has taken place on Russian soil. The groom, born in Spain, is a relative of the last Russian Tsar. Let's take a look.
Grand Duke George Mikhailovich Romanov tied the knot with his Italian bride in Russia's former imperial capital, St. Petersburg, on Friday. It was an elaborate religious ceremony with hundreds of foreign guests in attendance.
Last time an event of this scale happened before the revolution, and so for more than 100 years we haven't had a wedding of the members of the Romanov family on Russian soil. So today it is truly a historic event.
The communists executed Russia's last Tsar, Nicholas II, his wife, and their 5 children after the revolution in July 1918. The groom's great-grandfather was a first cousin of the Tsar. He managed to escape Russia during the revolution, first to Finland, then to Western Europe.
We heard about the difficult story of the royal family and everything that happened. And I think that maybe it's the moment for the Russian society to think that they don't need maybe like a royal family, but to be proud of the past is always a good thing for a nation.
The groom was born in Madrid and lived in Spain and France for most of his life. He visited Russia for the first time in 1992, after the fall of the Soviet Union. He said he chose St. Petersburg for his wedding because it was the first place in Russia he had returned to, and it is very close to the family. Guests at the wedding also appreciate the connection.
Well, to remember history is always a good thing, and Russian history is part of our common European history. And well, it's very interesting to be here and to remember everything about Russia, no? The cathedral, the history, the literature, the music. It's part of our history, of our culture, of our European culture.
The groom's mother, who is a Grand Duchess, is the self-proclaimed heir to Russia's imperial throne. She was present at the wedding. Many representatives of European royal families also attended the ceremony.
A solar-powered home on wheels is expected to begin its journey from Paris to southern Spain soon. It was made by a group of Dutch students who named their creation Stella Vida. NTD's Natalia Nutting has the story.
Created by a group of Dutch technology students, this vehicle is fueled entirely by solar power. With a bed and cooker inside, it's a little home on wheels. The students named it Stella Vita and say it's definitely not a traditional camper van.
We don't call it a camper, we call it a self-sustaining house on wheels, and it is because we are independent in the terms of our energy. So a camper isn't, and we are, so I think that we make something new concepts, new idea, new future, sustainable future.
Solar panels on the roof generate enough energy to drive and live off the grid. The students say that on a sunny day, it's capable of 450 miles with a top speed of 75 miles per hour. And thanks to its battery, it can drive hundreds of miles in the dark.
Yeah, so 60 kilowatt hour is the total capacity of the battery. And we have a solar surface of 17.5 square meters, which is quite big. It's about the same as you have on your house, but this is on a vehicle itself, so that's quite big.
The onboard information system shows how much power is available and tracks energy usage.
What's nice about this vehicle that it has a infotainment system, which actually means that it gives a great insight into your energy consumption. So it tells you, okay, I can make one more board of spaghetti, or I can drive a few kilometers more.
The team will set out to drive 2,000 miles from Paris to southern Spain as soon as the vehicle passes some final tests. They are confident Stella Vita can be on the market within 5 years. Natalia Nutting, NTD News.
Britain's 2 major lockdowns sparked a flurry of creativity, placing a renewed emphasis on the pursuit of personal projects to fill time. An Irish man recreated a traditional Irish bar in his own shed, and it has an interesting connection to the Titanic. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us the Irish tradition.
It was September 2020, just when Northern Ireland was gradually reopening after a first strict lockdown. Northern Irishman Enda Devlin lives with his wife and 2 children in rural County Tyrone. He had a unique idea. He decided to build his own traditional pub.
The idea and the ethos behind it was to actually take skills from the business, like as master specialist decorators, and transfer them into a bar. Like, so we thought, I discussed this with my wife, and basically she did agree, in the end.
The project took approximately 1,000 hours and involved the sourcing of artefacts from as far away as France and Italy.
You understand too, they're in the lockdown situation there in the evenings, which was done over the winter time as well. Like, so it was pretty late, and it sort of worked out well. Like.
The barn was typical of those found in rural Ireland.
I'd say about a good 80-90% was bought and restored in around the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and basically what we done was we restored them all here, on site, to create the authenticity in the bar.
Consisting of a main bar area, the pub also has a lounge with a traditional turf fire. There's also a dark cavernous seating area for card games and old tales which are only ever told in the early hours of the morning. There is a remarkable attention to detail. An old telephone sits amongst shot glasses and bottles of Irish whiskey. The bar also has an interesting connection to the Titanic.
So this door here is a big key feature here in the bar. It actually coming from the old Harlan and Wolff's drawing rooms where they built the Titanic. Now, it was in a state of complete disrepair, so we didn't grain it back to the way it was. But the glass maintained its whole character, as you can see, and it's still in really, really good shape.
Devlin refurbished the door, painting it green while still maintaining the striking design on its window. The door in the pub even still has its bell.
There's books in there over 300 years of age, and things like there's windows over there over 200 years of age as well. Like, so basically everything there has a right to be there, in creating that Irish authenticity.
A shebeen was an illicit bar where alcohol was served without a license. The term has spread around the world but originates in Ireland. In the lounge, rows of traditional sweet jars and weighing scales occupy a corner beside the fire. In earlier times, it was not unusual for Irish pubs to sell basic groceries, in keeping with its role at the centre of a town's community. Outside the barn, a grove of apple trees encompasses the front of Devlin's house. Like the pub, Devlin has maintained them with a sensitivity to the past. He's extended the orchard and hopes to use the apples to make cider for the pub.
I've said from day one, the only thing that bar needs to do right now is go cobwebs. That's it.
Neil Woodrow, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Before you go, here's something you should know. Don't forget you can catch all of NTD's programs on television. NTD Business premieres live Mondays through Fridays at 5 p.m. We broadcast to many of your favorite platforms, Apple TV and Roku, for example. We're also rapidly growing on cable, satellite, and over-the-air all across the United States. Just go to ntd.com/TV, type in your zip code, and find all the ways you can watch NTD.